Solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Quadratic equations are in the form y equals x squared. There will always be an x squared term. There may or may not be an x and a constant term. Quadratic equations, when graphed, look like parabolas. The solutions to the quadratic equations are the place or the places where the curve crosses the x-axis. This particular quadratic function has two solutions, x equals 3 and x equals 5. At those values for x, the y value is 0. So algebraically, if we want to find the solutions, we need to set the x squared minus 3x minus 4, in this case, equal to 0, and find those values for x, which will now make this equation true. X equals 4 is one of these solutions. There is another solution, x equals -1. So when you substitute -1 into this equation, you will also get 0. So therefore x equals -1. Completing the square will help us solve a quadratic equation. Let's review how to do that. This one is in good shape to complete the square for because the x squared and the x term are on the left. The constant term is on the right, in this case the constant term being 0. So what we want to do to complete the square is take half of the coefficient of the x term. Half of 8 is 4, and we square that. 4 squared is 16. So I want to add 16 to the left side of the equal sign to complete the square. To balance that off, I have to add it to the right as well. Now I want to write the left-hand side of my equal sign as a binomial squared, and I've simplified the right. I want to take the square root of both sides. When I do, I get x plus 4 on the left equals plus or minus 4. So I'm going to write that as two separate equations. And I'm going to solve for x, and I'll get two solutions. So this is one of those parabolas which will cross the x-axis at two different values. This one was easier because notice the form that was given. The structure of the equation was x squared plus some number times x equals 0. Let's try one more. This one is not as simple because there is a constant term other than 0. Let's subtract 80 from both sides. Now to complete the square, remember we're going to take half of -24. That's -12. Squared equals positive 144. Simplify the right-hand side, you get 64. And factor that perfect square trinomial on the left. Take the square root of both sides. You'll get x minus 12 equals plus or minus 8. So let's write it as two separate equations. X minus 12 equals positive 8, or x minus 12 equals -8. Now solve, and again we get two solutions. Very often with the quadratic equations you'll expect two solutions. Sometimes there's one solution and sometimes there's no real solution. So just to review the steps, we want the equation written like this: the x squared and the x term on the left, the number term on the right. Then you want to complete the square by taking half of the coefficient of b and squaring it. You add that number to both sides. Then remember the left-hand side you rewrite as a perfect square binomial. We take the square root of both sides of the equation and we determine the solutions from there.